Single dad. Michael just wanted to make his daughter's day with a few dollar store flowers. He never imagined the florist behind the counter was a lonely heiress searching for someone real. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning began the way most did for Michael Turner, half a step behind and already out of breath. The aroma of burnt toast drifted through the cramped kitchen as he shuffled across the linoleum floor in mismatched socks, flipping eggs with one hand and packing a peanut butter sandwich with the other. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, a leaky faucet, and a furnace that groaned like an old man in winter, but it held what mattered most, his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. She sat at the table, swinging her legs under her chair, her backpack twice the size of her. Her blonde curls stuck out in a dozen directions, and she had a smear of jelly on her cheek that she hadn't noticed yet. "Daddy, do we have time to look at my book report before school?" Michael paused mid-swipe with a dish rag, glanced at the clock, 7:43 a.m., then at her hopeful face. "Real quick, kiddo," he said, crouching beside her as she proudly opened a folder covered in crayon hearts. She read with a concentration that made his chest tighten. Her tiny finger followed each word carefully, and Michael didn't miss the way she glanced at him every few seconds, checking for approval. When she finished, he tapped the edge of the paper. "You crushed it, Lily Bean. Your teacher's gonna love this." Her grin lit up the whole room. By the time they tumbled out the door, Michael's coffee was cold and the frost had iced over the windshield. He scraped it with a spatula. His ice scraper had snapped 2 winters ago, and loaded Lily into the back seat of their battered sedan. The heater coughed to life as he backed down the driveway, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping a granola bar. Traffic was heavier than usual. The radio spat out static between country songs and weather warnings. Michael's mind buzzed with bills, unpaid, and spark plugs that still needed ordering at the shop. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Lily mouthing the words to her favorite song, he allowed himself a breath. Somehow, some way, they were making it. And for now, that had to be enough. It wasn't until Michael pulled up to the curb outside Lily's school that she leaned forward from the back seat, her voice small but urgent. "Daddy, did you get the thing?" Michael blinked, still half awake and running through the day's mental checklist. Oil change at 9, brake job by lunch, pick up Lily at 3:15. "What thing?" he asked, turning slightly in his seat. She clutched her backpack straps like they were life preservers. "The gift for Favorite Person Day. We were supposed to bring something for them." His stomach dropped. Favorite Person Day. It had been circled on the calendar. Lily had reminded him twice, drawn him a heart-covered note, even put it on the fridge. And still, he'd forgotten. Between the late nights at the shop and the busted water heater last week, the days had blurred into one long stretch of survival. Lily didn't say anything else, but her eyes dropped to her lap. That did more damage to Michael than any scolding ever could. "Stay right there," he said, throwing the car into park. "I'll be back in 5. He bolted across the street, dodging traffic, and half-sprinted toward the corner gas station. The aisles smelled like stale popcorn and motor oil. He scanned the shelves, candy bars, energy drinks, plastic-wrapped roses with price tags far above their worth. He hesitated only a second before grabbing a small bouquet of daisies and lavender that looked slightly wilted, but still colorful. They weren't perfect, but they were honest, like her. At the register, he emptied the last of the tip money from his wallet and watched the cashier wrap the bouquet in brown paper. Back at the car, he opened the door and held the flowers out to Lily like they were made of gold. "For your favorite person," he said, trying to sound light. Her eyes widened. "You remembered?" He nodded. "Course I did. Just had to keep it a surprise." She beamed and hugged the flowers to her chest, the disappointment gone as quickly as it came. As she stepped out of the car and into the schoolyard crowd, Michael leaned back in his seat, heart still racing, and watched her disappear inside with her bouquet. He might not have had much, but today he gave her everything he could. Michael hadn't planned on stopping. The dashboard clock was blinking 7:58. The shop opened at 8, and he was already late for a transmission job that was supposed to be done yesterday. But as he cruised down Maple Street, something caught his eye. An old storefront with a fresh coat of pale green paint and a wooden sign swinging gently above the door. Heart and Stem. The windows were fogged from the morning chill, but he could make out rows of flowers inside, bathed in golden light. It wasn't flashy. It didn't scream money. But something about it felt peaceful, like it belonged to a slower kind of world, one that hadn't gotten the memo about rush hours and overdue invoices. Michael hesitated, hand hovering over the blinker. Then he made a sharp turn and pulled up along the curb. The bell above the door chimed softly as he stepped in. The warmth hit him first, then the scent. Fresh roses, eucalyptus, something citrusy and clean. Buckets of blooms lined the rustic wood shelves, sunflowers, tulips, and little sprigs of baby's breath bundled with twine. A small radio hummed in the background, playing a jazz tune that sounded like it belonged in a black-and-white movie. "Be right with you?" a voice called from the back. He turned, expecting someone older, maybe the kind of woman who wore gloves to church and clipped coupons out of habit. But instead, a young woman stepped out from behind a curtain, wiping her hands on a linen apron. She was maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled into a loose braid, and soft features framed by tired eyes. Beautiful, but not in the way magazines sold it. Real, quietly striking. "Hi," she said, offering a gentle smile. "Looking for anything special?" Michael cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his grease-streaked jeans and the lingering smell of motor oil on his jacket. Something simple for my daughter. School thing." The woman nodded, already reaching for a cluster of fresh daisies. "She sounds lucky." "She is," Michael said, and meant it. She looked up at him then, her eyes searching his face for something. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. Or maybe she was just curious why a tired man with rough hands was standing in the middle of her flower shop at 8 in the morning. "I'm Evelyn," she said. "Michael." And just like that, a door quietly opened between two strangers, one with dirt under his nails, the other with secrets buried deeper than roots. Michael stood awkwardly near the front counter, scanning the prices tucked beside the blooms. The arrangements were beautiful, lush and full, tied with silk ribbon and arranged with an artist's precision, but even the smallest ones looked like they'd put a dent in the grocery money. His fingers drifted toward his wallet, mentally calculating what was left after rent and gas and the tire patch he still hadn't bought. "Any favorites?" Evelyn asked gently, sensing the hesitation. He glanced at her, then pointed toward a corner bucket holding a loose, mismatched bundle, lavender stems, daisies, and tiny blue wildflowers he couldn't name. They were a little uneven, a little scrappy, kind of like his life. "How much for those?" She smiled, and he saw something shift in her expression, something unspoken. $3. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "They're end-of-week stems, a little wild but still lovely." He nodded. "Perfect." Evelyn moved around the counter and carefully pulled the flowers free, gently fluffing them with her fingers. She didn't rush. She didn't treat them like scraps. Instead, she wrapped them in brown paper with such quiet care it caught Michael off guard. She tied them with a piece of twine, knotted just once, then tucked in a tiny sprig of rosemary from a nearby jar. "It means remembrance," she offered when she saw him glance at it. Michael didn't know what to say, so he just nodded and took out the crumpled bills from his pocket. She didn't count the money, just slipped it into a tin and handed him the bouquet with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Tell your daughter she has excellent taste." "I will. Thanks." He turned to go, pausing only once to glance back at the small shop and the woman standing behind the counter. She looked calm, composed, but there was something else beneath it, like she was waiting for something or someone. As the bell chimed behind him and the door closed, Evelyn stayed where she was, her hands still dusted with pollen. She stared at the empty space where he'd stood and felt, for the first time in weeks, a strange flicker of warmth. Not because he'd bought flowers, but because he'd seen her and didn't look away. Lily came bounding out of the school doors like a ray of sunshine breaking through a cloudy sky. Her puffy jacket flapped open, her pink backpack bouncing with each step as she made a beeline for Michael's car. The moment he stepped out and held out the small wrapped bouquet, her eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. "For me!" she gasped, hands flying to her mouth. Michael nodded, offering the flowers like they were a priceless treasure. "Favorite person day, remember?" She took them carefully, like they might float away if she gripped too tight. "They smell so good," she whispered, burying her face in them. "These are the prettiest flowers in the whole world." Michael smiled, a slow, quiet kind of smile that settled deep in his chest. $3 and a bit of twine, and he just made her week, maybe her year. "I wanted to make sure you had something special," he said, brushing a strand of hair out of her eyes. "You're my favorite person, too, you know." She grinned, teeth gapped and heart wide open, and hugged him with one arm, flowers squished awkwardly between them. "You're the best dad ever." He didn't say anything. He just held her a moment longer, letting the weight of the day melt into the warmth of her joy. Across town, Evelyn stood by the window of Heart and Stem, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The shop was quiet, the street mostly empty save for a few passing cars and a mail truck idling by the curb. She should have been restocking the roses or sweeping up fallen petals, but her thoughts kept drifting, back to the man with the tired eyes and quiet gratitude. The way he'd chosen the messiest little bouquet in the shop like it was worth its weight in gold. He hadn't asked for anything fancier. He hadn't flinched at the imperfections. He just wanted something honest for someone he loved. It was rare, that kind of simplicity, that kind of depth. Evelyn set down her tea and picked up a fresh bundle of wildflowers to sort. But as she worked, she realized something had shifted. She'd met a lot of customers over the years. But this one? He stayed. Not in the room, but somewhere quieter, somewhere deeper. And she wasn't sure yet what that meant, only that it mattered. The shop was quiet in the late afternoon, the kind of silence that settled in like dust, soft, familiar, and just a little bit sad. Evelyn moved through it on autopilot, trimming stems, misting roses, adjusting the daisies in their jars like she'd done every day for years. The smell of jasmine and eucalyptus clung to her skin, and a half-finished cup of tea sat cold beside the register. She glanced up at the bouquet station where the little wildflowers had been, the ones she'd wrapped for Michael that morning. He hadn't chosen them because they were cheap. He'd chosen them because they were enough. Enough. The word echoed louder than she wanted it to. She turned away, walking to the back room and pushing open the door to her tiny office. The walls were covered in pressed flowers, dried arrangements, and old botanical prints she'd collected over the years. But tucked behind a stack of catalogs was an envelope she hadn't opened in weeks. Her father's handwriting stared back at her. "Evelyn, please call me." She didn't. Instead, she sat at the little desk and let her fingers trace the edge of the envelope. Heart and Stem hadn't always been hers. It had belonged to her mother once, a quiet woman who found joy in the soil, in the slow growth of things. When she died, Evelyn inherited the shop, and with it a chance to disappear from the world she'd left behind. Hart and Sinclair. A name that still filled headlines, a retail empire sprawling across states and continents, her father's empire, and hers, technically, if she ever chose to claim it, but she hadn't. She'd walked away from the board meetings and private jets, from the family name with all its weight and gold edges, from the life where everyone wanted something, but no one wanted her. Here in the shop, people didn't ask who she was. They saw her hands, her work, the flowers she arranged with intention and quiet care. Here she could just be Evelyn. Still, today had left a mark. Michael Turner hadn't known who she was. He didn't care. And for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at her like she wasn't made of glass or dollar signs. He'd seen a florist, not an heiress, and somehow that mattered more than anything else. The wind had shifted by midweek, trading the crisp bite of early spring for something gentler, something that carried the scent of budding trees and thawing soil. Evelyn was refilling the eucalyptus bucket near the front window when she saw him. Michael Turner, same beat-up jacket, same worn-down boots, hands shoved into his pockets like he was fighting the cold or maybe just the day. He walked with that slightly hunched posture that came from years under hoods and engines, his eyes squinting against the sun as he moved down Maple Street. He wasn't looking at her window, wasn't looking for her at all. But Evelyn found herself stepping closer anyway, heart knocking once, hard. She should have let him pass, but something wouldn't let her. She grabbed a little printed card off the counter, something the wholesaler had sent with appreciation sale, 10% off, scrawled in bold, floral lettering, and pushed open the door just as he passed. "Hey!" she called out, the bell above the door jingling like backup vocals. "You were in here the other day, right? For your daughter?" Michael stopped mid-step and turned. "Yeah, I was. Lily loved the flowers, by the way." "Good," Evelyn said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "We're running a little customer appreciation thing this week. Thought you might want to check it out. 10% off everything." He raised an eyebrow. "Appreciating customers who spend $3 on wilting wildflowers?" Her cheeks flushed slightly. "It's not about the money." Michael hesitated, then glanced toward the shop. "I've got a lunch break to kill." "Then come in," she said, stepping aside. Inside, the shop was as he remembered, warm and earthy, sunlight stretching across wooden shelves and glass jars filled with life. Evelyn moved with an ease that made everything feel softer, realer. She handed him a fresh coffee without asking what he liked. As he sipped, he wandered a little. His fingers brushed over petals, paused at a photo on the wall of a woman who looked a lot like Evelyn, but older, softer. He didn't ask questions, neither did she, but something had shifted again, not loudly, not all at once, just a blooming curiosity, quiet, rooted, beginning. The coffee was too strong and slightly burnt, but Michael didn't complain. It was warm, and his hands were cold from the walk. He sat at the little wooden table near the front of the shop, a makeshift customer corner where Evelyn sometimes read during slow hours. She joined him with her own cup, fingers curled around the ceramic like she was trying to hold on to something solid. Outside, the street bustled in that slow, small-town way. Occasional footsteps, the creak of bike chains, a mail truck lurching past. Inside, it was just the two of them and the scent of fresh-cut stems. "So," Evelyn said, voice soft but steady, "how long have you been a mechanic?" Michael leaned back, taking a sip before answering. "Since I was 16. Started working in my uncle's garage after school. Just kind of stuck." "You like it?" He shrugged. "It's honest work, not glamorous. Pays the bills. Most days." There was no bitterness in his tone, just fact. That grounded kind of acceptance Evelyn didn't hear often in the world she used to live in, where everyone either chased more or pretended they had it. Michael wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress her. He didn't even seem entirely sure why he'd accepted her invitation. "And your daughter, Lily?" she asked. His face softened instantly, the corners of his mouth lifting in that quiet, protective way only fathers do. "She's everything. Keeps me going, keeps me honest, too. Can't even sneak a cookie in the house without her catching me." Evelyn smiled genuinely. "Sounds like she's got a good role model." Michael let out a dry chuckle. "I'm just trying not to screw her up too badly." There was a silence that stretched for a moment, comfortable, then something more. Evelyn studied him, not the grease under his nails or the tired in his eyes, but the calm beneath all that noise. He was nothing like the men she'd grown up around, and maybe that's why she couldn't stop staring. "You ever think about doing something else?" she asked. Michael looked at her, thoughtful. "Sometimes, but I think I'd rather be good at something simple than mediocre at something big." That answer did something to her, shifted something. She didn't know what. He didn't ask her about herself, didn't prod. But for the first time in a long time, Evelyn found herself wishing someone would. The morning had started beautifully, sunlight streaming through the tall front windows of Heart and Stem, the air soft and breezy with the scent of hyacinth. Evelyn had wheeled her old flower cart outside to catch the early foot traffic, filling it with mason jars of fresh-cut stems, a chalkboard sign reading, "Build your own bouquet, $5, propped beside it. She was just beginning to rearrange a drooping row of tulips when she heard it. A soft hiss, followed by an unmistakable thunk as the back wheel of the cart sagged to one side. She crouched down and sighed. Flat tire. Of course, it was a small thing, barely bigger than a bicycle wheel, but it had collapsed completely. The cart tilted, spilling a few blooms onto the sidewalk. Evelyn began gathering them up, more irritated at herself than anything. The wheel had been wobbly for weeks. She'd meant to fix it. That's when she heard footsteps. "Need a hand?" She looked up to find Michael standing at the edge of the sidewalk, a to-go coffee in one hand, work gloves tucked into his back pocket. He was still wearing his garage shirt, dark blue with his name stitched in thread over the heart. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "Just the cart. Flat tire. I'll figure it out." He crouched beside her without waiting for permission. "You got a wrench?" She blinked. "A what?" Michael grinned. "I'll take that as a no." He gently tipped the cart back to inspect the wheel. "Rubber's cracked right through. Looks like it's been begging for mercy a while now." Evelyn huffed, brushing her hair out of her face. "It's on my list, just not very high up." Michael said nothing for a moment, just pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket and went to work, hands moving with quiet precision. He didn't grumble or rush. He handled the little wheel like it mattered. And Evelyn watched him, watched how focused he became, how he wiped the dirt off the rim with the edge of his shirt, how he tested the axle twice to be sure it wouldn't wobble. "There," he said, finally standing. "It's not perfect, but it'll hold for now." She looked at the cart, then at him. "Thank you," she said, quieter than before. Michael shrugged. "Wasn't much." But it was. It really was. Saturday mornings were sacred in the Turner household, reserved for laundry, cereal, and catching up on all the things that didn't get done during the chaos of the week. But that morning, Lily had other plans. "I want to go see the flower lady," she announced over her bowl of fruity pebbles, chin propped in her hands. Michael sipped his coffee, still half asleep. "The flower lady?" "Yeah, from Favorite Person Day, remember?" she said, like he was the one behind on details. "She was nice, and her shop smelled like magic." Michael chuckled, setting his mug down. "Kiddo, I'm sure she's busy today." "She liked me," Lily insisted, climbing down from her chair with dramatic flair. "She said I had good taste." Michael rubbed a hand over his face. He had a leaky faucet to fix, a check engine light blinking at him from their car, and only a half tank of gas to stretch till payday. But Lily's eyes were already shining with the possibility of it all, and somewhere behind that stubbornness was a kid who didn't ask for much. "Okay," he said. "One visit, but no more than 20 minutes." The shop looked even brighter than Michael remembered, sunlight spilling through the windows like it had missed the place and was glad to be home again. Evelyn was arranging lilies when the bell chimed. She turned, and the surprise in her eyes was immediate but not unwelcome. "Well, look who's back," she said, her smile blooming instantly. Lily raced in, nearly knocking over a display of vases. "I wanted to show you my new notebook. It has flowers on it, just like yours." Evelyn knelt to her level, laughing softly. "That's beautiful. You've got excellent taste." Michael hovered awkwardly by the door, hands in his jacket pockets. "She's been asking about you all week." Evelyn glanced up, her smile softening. "That's the nicest thing I've heard all day." They stayed longer than 20 minutes. Evelyn gave Lily a tour of the shop, even letting her mist the ferns and label a few jars. Michael watched from a distance, more relaxed than he'd felt in days. When they finally left, Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching them disappear down the sidewalk. Her heart felt full in a way she hadn't expected, not with noise, not with excitement, just warmth. Like spring finally deciding to stay. The rain had started around noon, soft at first, like a whisper against the shop windows. But by 3, it was coming down in sheets. The gutters overflowed, the street outside turned into a shallow river, and Evelyn stood in the doorway of heart and stem, jacket pulled tight, watching the downpour with a sinking feeling at it. She'd made the mistake of walking to the shop that morning, trusting the weather forecast like it hadn't failed her before. Her umbrella had snapped in the first gust of wind, and now she was stranded, cell signal dropping in and out, and the buses too backed up to bother. She debated calling her father's driver. Technically, she still had the number, but something about that felt like failure, like surrendering a piece of the quiet life she'd worked so hard to carve out. Just as she was about to close up and figure it out later, her phone buzzed. Michael Turner. Hey, need a lift? Evelyn stared at the screen, a smile tugging at her lips. How did he... Another text followed. Lily saw the weather and said, "We have to go get the flower lady." Hard to argue with that. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the curtain of rain as a beat-up blue pickup rolled to a stop in front of the shop. Evelyn locked the door and ran, splashing through puddles as the wind howled down Maple Street. Michael leaned over and popped open the passenger door. "Hop in before this thing floats away." She climbed in, dripping wet, laughing despite herself. The truck smelled like leather, old pine air freshener, and faint traces of motor oil. Lily was curled up in the back seat, scribbling in her notebook. "Hi, Evelyn," she chirped, without looking up. "Hi, sweetheart," Evelyn said, heart warming as she settled in. As Michael drove, wipers working double time, Evelyn stared out the fogged windshield. The world beyond was a blur of water and wind, but inside the cab, everything felt steady, safe. The dash was cracked. The heater clicked every few minutes, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was familiar. "You didn't have to come all the way out," she said softly. Michael glanced at her. "Didn't feel right, letting you walk home in this." Evelyn turned toward the window, hiding the way her throat tightened. Through his windshield, the world was stripped of pretense. Just pavement, sky, and people who showed up when it counted. She liked this view better. The rain had long since passed by the time Evelyn worked up the nerve to hand Michael the invitation. The sky had turned that soft watercolor blue of early spring, and the shop smelled of lilac and fresh soil. She held the envelope in her hand like it might bite. Michael had stopped by to pick up a small pot of violets Lily had absolutely needed for her windowsill, and Evelyn found herself lingering near the counter, stalling. "So, there's this thing," she said, sliding the envelope toward him across the wood grain. Michael raised a brow, glancing at it like she'd just handed him a job application. "Thing? It's a garden party," she said quickly, too quickly. "A fundraiser, Saturday afternoon, family-run charity. I help host it every spring." Michael didn't move to pick it up. "You want me to go?" "And Lily," she added. "There'll be food, music, face painting even. I thought she'd like it." She left out the rest. The part about the manicured estate in Rose Hill, the press coverage, the gleaming crowd of donors and legacy families who'd flown in from out of state. She didn't want to see the look in Michael's eyes when he realized the truth about who she was. Not yet. He finally opened the envelope and studied the thick cardstock. It was far too elegant for anything she'd claimed was casual. "This looks fancy," he said, voice neutral. "It's not that serious," she lied. "You don't have to wear a tie or anything." Michael smirked. "I don't even own a tie." Evelyn laughed, more nervous than amused. "You'll be fine. I'd really like you to come." He studied her for a moment, like he was trying to read the spaces between her words. But then he nodded, tucking the invitation into his jacket pocket. "All right, we'll come." When he left, Evelyn exhaled, shoulders sagging. She hated the half-truth, hated the feeling of hiding, but part of her needed to see something. For once in her life, could someone see all of her and still stay? Saturday would be the test, and she wasn't sure she was ready for the answer. The estate in Rose Hill looked like something out of a magazine. Long, winding driveway framed by willows, white tents fluttering on manicured lawns, waiters in black vests weaving through clusters of guests holding champagne flutes instead of coffee mugs. Michael hadn't even made it out of the truck before he felt it, the tightening in his chest, the instinct to turn around. He glanced at Lily in the passenger seat, her braids bouncing as she clutched a crumpled drawing for Miss Evelyn. She was beaming, excited, utterly unaware of how out of place her father felt. Evelyn met them near the entrance, radiant in a pale green dress that made her look like she belonged to the gardens themselves. But her smile faltered the second she saw Michael's eyes. He was looking past her, at the guests, the cameras, the name Hart printed across the banner strung above the tent. Lily ran ahead, weaving through the crowd toward the crafts table. Michael stayed frozen beside the truck. "You didn't say it was this kind of party," he said, voice low but sharp around the edges. Evelyn stepped closer, hands clasped in front of her. "I didn't know how to explain it. I didn't want it to matter before it had to." He let out a short breath. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything. "Hart, as in Hart and Sinclair? You're that Hart?" "Yes." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the event around them. Soft jazz, murmured conversation, the pop of a champagne cork. "You should have told me," he said finally, not accusing, just tired. "I'm standing here in a flannel shirt and scuffed boots, surrounded by people who probably have monogrammed pajamas." Evelyn reached for his arm but stopped herself. "You don't need a suit or a last name that opens doors. That's not why I invited you." "Then why did you hide it?" His voice cracked just slightly, more from disappointment than anger. "I didn't want you to look at me differently," she said, and for the first time he saw something behind her usual composure. Fear. Michael looked past her to where Lily laughed over watercolor paints, completely at ease in a place he'd never fit. "I guess I already am," he said, and walked away toward his daughter, leaving Evelyn standing among the roses she once thought could hide everything. But secrets, like flowers, always find their way into the light. The drive home was quiet. Lily, half asleep in the back seat, cradled her paper plate of half-eaten cookies and finger-painted art like treasure. Michael kept his eyes on the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. He hadn't said much since they left the Hart estate, just a clipped "ready to go" and a polite thank you to a valet who looked at his truck like it might leave oil stains on the gravel. Evelyn had tried to catch his eye as they left, but Michael hadn't looked back. Now, as the highway unspooled in front of him, his mind was a churn of confusion and something dangerously close to hurt. He wasn't angry that Evelyn came from money. He didn't care about estates or last names. What bothered him was that she hadn't told him, had let him stand there like some scruffy stranger among the elite, clueless and underdressed, while she mingled with people who spoke in hedge funds and brand names. She hadn't trusted him. By the time he pulled into the driveway, Lily was asleep, head tipped against the window, bouquet of wildflowers for Evelyn still clutched in her lap. He didn't know what to do with that. Back at Heart and Stem, Evelyn sat behind the counter long after closing, the open sign turned inward, the lights dimmed. The quiet wrapped around her like a cold shawl. A vase on the counter held the same wildflowers she'd set aside that morning, now beginning to wilt at the edges. She kept replaying the look on Michael's face when he'd pieced it all together, how quickly his openness had turned into something guarded, distant, and how much it stung. But she couldn't blame him. People had loved her name for years. They loved what it could do, where it could get them. Evelyn Hart opened doors, paid for dinners, looked polished in the press. But rarely, so rarely did anyone want Evelyn. Just Evelyn, quiet, stubborn, unsure of herself, tired of pretending. Michael had been different, or maybe she'd just hoped he would be. Now trust, something so fragile and slow-growing, had bent under the weight of unspoken truths, and she couldn't help but wonder if it would bloom again. The letter came folded in thirds, crayon-colored on construction paper, and tucked into a small envelope with a heart sticker sealing the flap. Evelyn found it waiting on the shop counter the following morning, slipped through the mail slot some time before sunrise. At first, she thought it was another brochure or donation request left over from the fundraiser, but when she opened it, a small slip of paper fluttered out, along with a drawing of a flower that looked more like a sun with leaves. She read the handwriting slowly, each crooked letter drawn with care. Dear Miss Evelyn, thank you for the party and the paints and the flower juice you gave us. Daddy called it lemonade, but I know it was special. I liked your dress. You looked like a garden. I'm sorry my daddy got quiet. He does that when he's nervous. But he said you are really nice, and I think he still likes you. He just doesn't think he belongs in fancy places. But I think you're like our flower lady no matter what. I hope you come back. From your friend, Lily Turner. Evelyn didn't realize she was crying until the ink on the page blurred slightly where her thumb touched the corner. She read the note again, slower this time, catching every sweet misspelling, every pure thought. Lily had written what no adult could say without complication, without weight, just the truth, offered freely. You're like our flower lady no matter what. The line nestled deep in Evelyn's chest, warm and unshakable. Because that's all she'd ever wanted, to be seen for who she was, not the name attached to her birth certificate, not the legacy she never asked for, just the woman who wrapped wildflowers with twine and made lemonade that tasted like summer. She looked around the shop, quiet in the morning light, the petals just beginning to open. Everything felt still, peaceful. But the letter in her hand sparked something. Not everything was broken. Not yet. Because maybe trust, like a garden, didn't bloom overnight. Maybe it started small, just a child's letter, a handful of words. And maybe that was enough to start growing again. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden streaks across the cracked pavement as Evelyn stepped out of her car and into the scent of grease, rubber, and exhaust. Turner's auto sat at the edge of town, unassuming and worn, like everything here, functional and unbothered by appearances. The bell above the office door jingled weakly as she walked in, but no one looked up right away. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back in a messy knot, no designer handbag, no carefully rehearsed version of herself, just Evelyn. Michael was under a rusted-out Dodge, his legs jutting out as the impact wrench clattered rhythmically. She hesitated, unsure for the first time in a long while, then cleared her throat gently. He rolled out from under the car, blinking against the light. When he saw her, he didn't say anything at first, just sat up, wiping his hands on a rag, a faint wariness in his eyes. I didn't come here to fix anything, she said softly. Unless you count us. Michael stood, brushing off his hands, his expression unreadable. Didn't expect to see you here. I got Lily's letter, she said. It reminded me who I was trying to be and who I didn't want to lose. He leaned against the tool bench, arms crossed. You lied, Evelyn. I didn't lie, she said quickly. I just didn't tell you everything, because I liked how you saw me when you didn't know. He looked away, then back again. And who are you now? She swallowed. Still the woman who owns a flower shop. Still the one who wraps wildflowers like they're precious. Still the one who sat in your truck during the rain and didn't want the ride to end. I'm not the last name, not the headlines, not the money. Michael studied her, eyes softer now. You know what threw me? It wasn't the party. It was wondering if I ever fit in your world. You don't have to, she said. I don't even want to live in that world anymore. They stood there for a long moment, just breathing in the scent of oil and honesty. No masks, no performances. Can I take you to coffee? She asked. Michael nodded. Yeah, I think I'd like that. And just like that, the space between them started to shrink. Not completely, not instantly, but enough. It was just past noon when the black town car pulled up in front of Heart and Stem, its glossy finish glaring against the soft pastel charm of the flower shop. Evelyn looked up from trimming a bouquet of coral peonies, her breath catching the moment she recognized the sleek silhouette stepping onto the sidewalk. Her father. Charles Hart never arrived unannounced, not without a reason, and never without an agenda. He stepped inside, the door chime sounding absurdly delicate against the sharpness of his presence. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, tie perfectly knotted, he looked out of place among the sunlit petals and mason jars. He took it all in with a single sweep of his gaze, distaste barely hidden beneath a professional smile. "Evelyn," he said, voice clipped, "you look rustic." "Dad," she replied, standing straighter, not bothering to hide the edge in her tone. "To what do I owe the intrusion?" He didn't flinch. "I thought we should talk. In person." "About?" He gestured vaguely to the flowers around them. "This performance. This phase." Evelyn clenched her jaw. "It's not a phase. It's my life." "No," he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice. "Our name is your life, and you're wasting it on wildflowers and wooden counters. Do you even remember the Hart and Sinclair board seat that's waiting for you?" "I never wanted it." "You were born for it." Evelyn turned her back to him, fussing with a half-made bouquet, needing something to hold. "I was born into it, not for it." Charles sighed like a man who'd grown tired of repeating himself. "This man you've been seen with, Turner? A mechanic? Is that really what you want for your future?" She froze, slowly turned. "He's kind and honest, and he doesn't want anything from me. That's more than I can say for most people I've known." "You're risking everything," he warned. "Your stake, your name. I'm not ashamed to lose what never made me happy." For a moment silence hung like fog between them. Then Charles straightened, buttoned his jacket. "You'll regret this," he said, cool and certain, and walked out the door as if the conversation had been business, nothing more. But Evelyn stood rooted in place, her hands trembling slightly over the stems. Because for once, she wasn't afraid of losing everything. She was afraid of finally choosing herself. Michael hadn't meant to stop by the shop. He'd been running errands on his lunch break, picking up brake pads, grabbing a sandwich, and something about the way the light hit Hart and Stem as he passed made him slow down. He thought maybe he'd pop in, see if Evelyn was free for 5 minutes, maybe invite her and Lily out for ice cream later. But as he rounded the corner, he froze. Through the front window, he saw her. Evelyn. Standing across from a tall man in a suit so sharp it looked like it belonged in a magazine. The man was close. Too close. Hands tucked neatly into his pockets, expression calm but firm, like he was delivering instructions he expected to be followed. Evelyn's face was hard to read, caught between tension and restraint. She wasn't smiling. Still, Michael didn't move. He watched as the man leaned in slightly, speaking low. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She just stood there, quiet and still, like someone waiting for the storm to pass. Then the man straightened, buttoned his jacket with practiced elegance, and walked out the door. Michael ducked behind a parked car, heart thudding like a fool. He felt ridiculous, but not enough to face her, not with that image seared into his mind. Later, back at the garage, he couldn't focus. His wrench slipped. He stripped a bolt. He stared at the ceiling longer than the job in front of him. Who was that man? Someone important, obviously. Probably the kind of person Evelyn actually belonged with. A man who wore silk ties and gave orders without needing to raise his voice. Someone from her real world. Michael looked down at his oil-stained hands, the faded name patch on his shirt, the calluses that never went away no matter how much lotion Lily tried to make him use. He'd been fooling himself. Maybe she'd liked the simplicity. Maybe she'd even meant what she said. But eventually, Evelyn Hart would wake up and remember who she was. And Michael Turner, with his rusted truck and patched-up life, would be nothing more than a detour, a good story. But not the destination. The knock came just after closing. Evelyn stood behind the counter, sweeping up petals from a dropped bouquet, when she heard it, firm, expectant, and far too familiar. She didn't even have to look to know it was him. Charles Hart stepped inside without waiting for an answer. He didn't glance at the fresh arrangements lining the windows, didn't notice the soft jazz playing on the old radio. His presence dimmed everything, like a storm cloud in a sunlit room. "I'm not staying long," he said, voice brisk. "There's a gala next week. The board wants to formally announce your return." Evelyn didn't stop sweeping. "I never said I was coming back." He frowned. "You didn't need to. This phase has lasted long enough. I gave you space to figure it out, Evelyn. Now it's time to stop playing Florist and come back to your future." She leaned the broom against the wall and folded her arms. "My future is here." Charles stepped closer, gaze sharp. "This place? That man?" "I'm not discussing Michael with you," she said coolly. "You don't know him, and you don't get to decide what's worthy of me." He sighed. "I'm not the only one concerned. The Everetts have asked about you, Nathan in particular. He's patient, respectful. You two always pod." "No," Evelyn said flatly. "I'm not marrying a man you picked like a wine pairing. He's successful, from a good family. He understands your life." "My life?" She laughed, bitter and quiet. "You mean your version of it. The one with dinner parties and stock options and husbands who treat wives like company assets." "You're being dramatic." "I'm being honest," she snapped. "I've spent years walking around in shoes that didn't fit, smiling for pictures I didn't want to be in. I finally found something real, something I built with my own two hands, and you expect me to throw it away for a press release?" Charles looked at her, really looked, and for a moment she saw it, doubt flickering behind his carefully managed expression. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice soft but certain. "Not to the boardroom, not to the ballrooms, not to Nathan. You can keep all of it." She stepped forward and opened the door. "But you don't get to keep me." He said nothing as he walked out, and this time Evelyn didn't watch him go. She had flowers to water and a life to claim. The call came just after noon. Evelyn had just finished tying off a bouquet for a birthday order when her phone buzzed, a number she didn't recognize flashing on the screen. She almost let it go to voicemail, almost, but something in her chest tugged. "Hello? Hi, this is Nurse Carter at St. Vincent's. We have a Michael Turner here listed you as an emergency contact." Evelyn's heart dropped. "What happened?" "He's okay, but he had a fall at work. Garage jack slipped. Minor concussion, a few stitches. He's stable, but we'd like someone here with him." The room spun briefly, then stilled. "I'm on my way." The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old tile, the kind of place where time stretched and everything moved half a beat too slow. Evelyn rushed through the ER doors, breath short, eyes scanning. Room 213. She found him propped up on a bed, IV in his arm, hair matted slightly with blood near the temple. He looked pale, not fragile, but dimmed, like the switch had been flicked low. He turned when she entered. "Evelyn?" "Hey," she said, breath catching. "You look like hell." Michael smirked faintly. "Appreciate the honesty." Before she could step closer, a small blur darted into the room. "Daddy!" Lily hurled herself onto the bed, careful not to jostle him too hard, tears already in her eyes. "You scared me," she mumbled into his shoulder. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Just took a little tumble." Evelyn stood in the doorway, suddenly unsure of her place. But then Lily looked up, eyes red and wide, and lit up. "Miss Evelyn!" She ran to her, arms thrown around her waist like they belonged there. "You came?" Lily whispered. "Of course I did," Evelyn said, kneeling to hug her back. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." Michael watched them, his daughter clinging to Evelyn like she'd always known her, and Evelyn holding her like she needed to. He blinked against the sting in his eyes. In that moment, something shifted. Evelyn wasn't just the flower lady anymore. She was part of the picture, and somehow she fit. The hospital room had gone quiet hours ago. Lily was curled up on the pull-out chair, her breathing slow and steady beneath a threadbare blanket. The soft glow of a hallway light spilled under the door, and the faint beep of a heart monitor offered the only rhythm in the room. Michael lay in the hospital bed, head bandaged, IV still taped to his arm. He wasn't in pain, at least not the kind they treated. He stared at the ceiling, tired but not sleepy, his thoughts a knotted mess of doubt, relief, and something softer he hadn't let himself name yet. Across the room, Evelyn sat in the chair beside him, legs tucked up, hands wrapped around a cup of hospital coffee. She hadn't left since she arrived, not once. "I used to hate places like this," she said suddenly, her voice just above a whisper. Michael turned his head slightly, watching her in the dim light. "Hospitals?" "No," she said, quiet, stillness. When I was a kid, everything was fast. Schedules, appearances, obligations. Silence wasn't peaceful. It was pressure." He didn't speak, just listened. She needed that more than answers. "I was 12 the first time they made me sit at a board meeting," she said. 14 when I started wearing dresses picked by someone else's assistant. 16 when they told me who I'd marry, eventually, because it made sense on paper. Michael's jaw clenched faintly. "That's not a life, that's a script." She smiled sadly. "Exactly. And I was good at it, for a while." She looked at him then, really looked. Eyes soft but no longer guarded. "The shop was my mother's. It was the only place I ever saw her smile without faking it. After she passed, I took it over and disappeared. People thought I was grieving, but really, I was waking up." Michael let that sink in. "You didn't owe me all that," he said. "I did," she said, her voice gentler now, "because I wanted you to know the truth, all of it. No title, no money, just me." He stared at the ceiling again, letting the silence return, but this time it didn't feel heavy. "I believe you," he said after a long pause, "and I'm tired of being afraid of something good." She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. For once, there were no performances, no pretending, just two people stripped of everything but truth. And it was enough. The night air was cool, the kind that slipped under your collar and made you grateful for every layer. Michael's truck sat parked at the edge of Maplewood's old overlook, a quiet spot above the town where the stars felt closer, the world quieter. The headlights were off, the engine silent, and the bed of the truck was lined with two folded blankets, a cooler, and a pair of mismatched lawn chairs for good measure. Evelyn climbed in first, laughing softly as the metal creaked beneath her. "This is surprisingly comfortable." Michael handed her a thermos. "Hot chocolate, Lily's recipe, half sugar, no regrets." She took a sip and closed her eyes. "That's dangerously good." They sat side by side on the blankets, their shoulders just brushing, eyes drawn upward to the wide open sky. The stars were scattered like glitter across deep velvet, and for once, Evelyn didn't feel the itch to check her phone or fill the silence. "This place," she said after a while, "it feels like it doesn't care who you are." Michael nodded. "It doesn't." She looked over at him. "You've brought someone here before?" He shook his head. "Just Lily. And now you." That sentence sat between them, simple but full. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, warmth blooming somewhere below the surface. "I used to think dates had to be restaurants with 5 forks on the table," she said. "But this? Stars and sugar overload? It's better." Michael chuckled. "It's all I've got. It's everything I need." The quiet settled again, but this time it was laced with something new, ease. They talked for hours, about old memories and missed chances, about Evelyn's favorite flowers and Michael's worst car repairs. No pressure, no pretending. At one point he looked at her, really looked, bare-faced, hair windswept, smiling in the dark like she belonged there, and he reached out, gently brushing a strand from her cheek. "I like you like this," he said. She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "This is who I am." And under a sky full of stars, without fanfare or fuss, Rich finally met real. And they fit. It started with a photograph, one grainy image snapped from across the overlook, probably by someone with a long lens and too much time. Evelyn and Michael, sitting in the back of his truck, her head on his shoulder, a blanket around them, peaceful, quiet, intimate. By morning, it wasn't. Michael woke to his phone buzzing nonstop, calls, texts, a voicemail from a guy he hadn't heard from since high school. At first, he thought someone had died. Then he saw the headline on the screen. "Heiress in Hometown Romance, Evelyn Hart's Mystery Man Revealed." The article was worse than the headline. Photos of him pumping gas, carrying Lily on his shoulders, walking into the flower shop in his stained work shirt. Words like blue-collar mechanic and small-town flame were sprinkled between speculative paragraphs and unnamed sources. By 10 a.m., the garage phone had rung 5 times with reporters asking for comment. By noon, his boss had called him into the office. "Not saying you did anything wrong," the man said, eyes flicking to the printout on the desk. "But this kinda attention? It's a distraction." Michael left early, head spinning. Across town, Evelyn was already trying to put out the fire. The moment the story broke, her father's assistant had called. The board wanted statements. Her father wanted silence. The PR team had prepared something vague and sterile. "Miss Hart is focusing on her business and her privacy at this time." She deleted it. Instead, she drove straight to the shop, heart pounding, unsure of what version of Michael she'd find waiting for her. He was in the back lot, arms crossed, phone face down on the workbench. "You okay?" she asked gently. He didn't look at her right away. "They took pictures of Lily." Her stomach dropped. "I didn't think this would touch her," he said, voice tight. "I didn't think you would." Evelyn stepped closer. "I didn't know either, but I'm not letting them rewrite this." Michael finally met her eyes, stormy and hurt. They already did. And for the first time since she'd walked into his life, Evelyn wasn't sure how to fix what had been broken without ever meaning to. The small-town silence had never felt so loud. Maplewood was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your habits, and whether your front porch light had gone out for more than a day. It was friendly, familiar, until it wasn't. Until you became the headline. By Monday, the whispers started. In the grocery store aisle, at the gas station, behind the service desk at the post office. Not cruel, not exactly, but loud enough for Michael to hear. "Did you see the photos? She could have picked anyone. Why him? Must be nice to be discovered while changing someone's oil." He kept his head down at the garage, hands busier than usual, avoiding eye contact when customers brought up the news with forced smiles. He could feel it in their tone, the assumption that this would pass, that he would pass. Once the novelty wore off and Evelyn returned to the life she really belonged to. He started eating lunch in the truck again. Meanwhile, Evelyn walked through town like she had nothing to hide, shoulders back, eyes steady. She visited the bakery, the library. She returned to Heart and Stem like it was any other week, but Michael knew it wasn't. She noticed, too. "You're pulling away," she said one evening, standing on his front porch as Lily colored just inside. "You barely look at me." "I'm looking at everything else," he said, not unkindly. "All of it, the press, the people, the gap between us." "There is no gap unless you put it there," she said. He sighed, leaning against the rail. "Evelyn, this town isn't built for what we are, and I'm not sure I am, either." She stepped closer. "I don't care what they think. I chose this life, remember? Not the boardroom, not the headlines, you. But I didn't choose this spotlight," he said. "Lily didn't?" That landed between them like a dropped stone. Evelyn's voice softened. "So what now?" Michael looked toward the horizon where dusk had started to settle over the trees. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm starting to wonder if love's enough when the world keeps trying to pull us apart." And for the first time, Evelyn wasn't sure her strength alone could hold them together. The letter arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope. No return address, just a gold-embossed Hart and Sinclair logo in the corner that made Evelyn's stomach twist before she even opened it. Inside, a formal proposal, a buyout. Charles Hart's signature graced the bottom of the document, but the decision had clearly come from the board. The terms were generous, almost offensively so. They were offering her full ownership of the company's lifestyle division, a clean break, no strings, no more board meetings, no more obligatory galas, just power, autonomy, and a fresh start. But it came with a caveat. She'd have to leave Maplewood, move to the city, run operations from headquarters, step fully into the empire, not as her father's daughter, but as her own force. For years, she'd dreamed of having that kind of control, the ability to shape things her way. No manipulation, no legacy shadows. She could rebuild the brand into something slower, softer, something honest. It should have been everything she wanted. But when she looked out the shop's front window and saw the cracked sidewalk, the kids riding bikes past the bakery, the place where Michael's truck used to idle just before closing, she felt hollow. This town had changed her, grounded her. He had. She sat at the work table, the proposal spread out in front of her like a road map, to somewhere she wasn't sure she wanted to go. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel excited by the power on offer. She felt conflicted. That night she walked the 2 blocks to the garage, even though she knew Michael wouldn't be there. The bay was dark, quiet, but she stood in front of it anyway, fingers curled around the envelope, wishing she could ask him what to do without making it his burden. If she took the offer, she could prove to the world and to herself that she wasn't just a name. She could build something lasting, something entirely her own, but it might cost her the one thing she hadn't been trying to build and hadn't expected to find: home. And suddenly the choice didn't feel as clear as it used to. The offer came on a Tuesday morning, slipped in between 2 brake jobs and a busted radiator. Michael had grease on his hands and sweat on his brow when Rick, the garage's owner for the last 22 years, pulled him aside and handed him a folded piece of paper with the word opportunity scribbled in Sharpie across the top. Inside, a job title he hadn't expected. Operations manager, full-time, benefits, a salary big enough to breathe a little, not just survive, but maybe plan. For once. "I'm stepping back next year," Rick said, his voice gruff but steady. "You're the one I trust to keep this place running right." Michael stared at the paper like it might vanish. It was everything he'd been working toward for years, even if he hadn't dared name it. Stability, security, something solid for Lily's future. But then Rick added, almost as an afterthought, "I'll need your full focus, no distractions. This kind of role, it asks everything from you." Michael knew what that meant. No missed mornings because of sudden flower shop visits. No dodging phone calls from reporters. No second life blooming on the edges of this one. No Evelyn. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Michael sat at the kitchen table, the offer in one hand and a photo of him and Lily in the other, taken at the town fair last summer, her face painted like a butterfly, his smile the kind that came from knowing he was enough, just as he was. But now he wasn't sure. Could he say yes to a future that required him to shut out a part of his heart? Could he build a life for Lily that didn't include the woman who'd made both of them feel like more than just survivors? It was the kind of decision that asked for clarity, but all Michael could feel was torn. Between the life he could finally secure and the love he wasn't sure he deserved to fight for. The evening air was thick with the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Michael stood outside the garage, arms crossed, back against the rusted siding. The town was settling down around them, shop windows dark, porch lights flickering on, the scent of rain somewhere in the distance. Evelyn had texted earlier. "Can we talk?" He'd said yes, though every part of him had wanted to say not yet. She arrived without fanfare, hair down, a cardigan wrapped tight around her like armor. There was no soft smile this time, no playful comment, just her, and that envelope in her hand. "I got the offer," she said. "A full buyout, no strings. It's everything I thought I wanted." Michael nodded slowly. "And?" "It means leaving Maplewood." He looked away. She took a step closer. "But it doesn't have to mean leaving you." Michael's jaw tightened. "It kind of does." "No," she said more firmly. "Not if you believe we can make it work. I want you to come with me, Michael. You and Lily. We could start fresh, build something together." He laughed, just once, hollow. "You want me to drop everything I've finally built here? For what? To follow you into a world I don't belong in?" "You do belong," she said. "With me." He shook his head. "I've spent years keeping Lily's life steady, safe, and now I've finally got a shot at something solid, a future for her that doesn't depend on borrowed time or someone else's promise." "And you think I'm a risk?" she said quietly. "No," he said, voice low. "I think we are." That silence again. This time it cut deep. Evelyn's shoulders fell. "I thought maybe we were the kind of risk worth taking." Michael didn't answer. He couldn't. Not because he didn't love her, he did in the way that scared him more than anything, but because love wasn't something he knew how to trust when everything else in his life had been earned the hard way. She waited one more beat, then handed him the envelope. "If you change your mind, you know where I'll be." And just like that, Evelyn turned and walked into the twilight. Michael didn't stop her, not because he didn't want to, but because part of him still didn't believe something that good could really stay. Michael found the bouquet on the kitchen table when he walked in. Stems uneven, colors clashing, and petals a little wilted from a long day in a 7-year-old's backpack. But even still, it was beautiful in its own way. A patchwork of dandelions, wild clover, and one stubborn tulip from the school garden. Lily sat at the counter, swinging her legs and peeling the label off a juice box. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I made them for Evelyn." Michael paused, keys still in hand. "Yeah?" She nodded, serious. "It was Flower Appreciation Day. We were supposed to make a bouquet for someone who makes us feel special." Her fingers fidgeted with the edges of a construction paper tag tied with yarn. "To Evelyn, from Lily." "She makes you feel special?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "She makes you feel special too," Lily said, finally looking up, "even when you pretend she doesn't." Michael swallowed hard, walked over, and sat beside her. "She's leaving," he said quietly. "Might already be gone." Lily furrowed her brow. "Then you better hurry." He let out a long breath, one hand rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "Yes, it is," she said, and handed him the bouquet with both hands. "You should give these to her. People like her don't happen twice." The room went still for a moment. Michael stared at the messy little flowers, the ones picked with tiny fingers, and the kind of care that didn't come with conditions. It wasn't just a school project. It was a nudge, a reminder, from the one person whose opinion he trusted more than his own. He stood slowly, bouquet in hand, and kissed the top of her head. "You might be the smartest person I know." "I get that from you," she said, grinning. He didn't wait, didn't overthink it. Because for the first time in weeks, his fear wasn't louder than his hope, and that hope carried him out the door, flowers in hand, towards something he should have reached for a long time ago. The truck rattled as Michael pushed it harder than he had in years, tires humming against the road like a heartbeat trying to outrun time. The bouquet Lily had made was wedged carefully in the passenger seat, the yarn-tied tag fluttering with every bump. His hands gripped the wheel like he could will the lights to stay green. "Please don't be gone." He didn't know where exactly Evelyn would be, just that the offer's deadline was today and that her flight to New York was scheduled sometime before sunset. She hadn't answered his texts. He didn't blame her. The radio buzzed with static, and the sun slanted low over Maplewood, casting long shadows across familiar streets that now felt like a maze. He checked the time on the dash. If she'd left already. He swallowed the thought. No, she's still here. She has to be. His first stop was the shop. Heart and Stem sat dark and locked, a single note taped to the glass. Closed today. Thank you for your love and support. The inside was clean, the counters cleared. No half-wrapped stems or half-finished cups of tea. It felt like goodbye. Michael's pulse kicked harder. He bolted back into the truck, heart pounding, as he turned toward the small airstrip outside of town. It wasn't much. One terminal, 2 gates, and a waiting room that still had vending machines from the 90s, but it was where flights to the city departed every evening. The parking lot was nearly empty when he pulled in, brakes squealing just a little as he cut the engine and jumped out. The bouquet flopped in his grip, petals bending under the rush. He burst into the terminal, scanning the crowd. A family by the vending machine, a businessman on his phone, and then her. Near gate 2, suitcase at her side, boarding pass in hand. She hadn't seen him yet. Michael slowed for a moment, breath caught in his throat. Then he called out, voice cracking with everything he hadn't said. "Evelyn?" She turned. And in that moment, eyes wide, mouth parting in disbelief, he knew he wasn't too late. She didn't board the plane. Evelyn had stood there, watching the doors open. Her boarding group called, and still, her feet hadn't moved. Not when she saw Michael running through the terminal, out of breath and holding a wilted bouquet like it was the most important thing in the world. Not when she saw the look on his face, wide open and terrified. She left the ticket behind. Now, hours later, the sky turning dusky rose, Michael found her where he should have looked first. The greenhouse behind Heart and Stem was old, tucked behind the shop like a secret. It had belonged to Evelyn's mother once, a place full of saplings and forgotten heirlooms, glass panes streaked with time, and there she was, kneeling in the dirt, her hands carefully burying the roots of a tiny marigold, the sleeves of her cardigan pushed up, eyes focused. She didn't look up when he stepped inside, but she spoke. "I knew you'd come here, if you knew me." Michael stood in the doorway, the scent of damp soil and wildflowers surrounding him. He held the bouquet, now slightly crushed from the chase, and stepped closer. "I didn't bring a speech," he said. "I don't have the words for that kind of thing." Evelyn looked up then, meeting his eyes. There was no guard left in her, just quiet and waiting. He held out the bouquet, clumsy, uneven, perfect. "Lily picked these. She said people like you don't happen twice." Her lip trembled, just barely. "I've been scared," he admitted. "Not of you, of this, of letting something matter and not knowing how to keep it. But today I realized something. I've never had control, not really, not over the hard stuff. But I can choose what I show up for." She stood slowly, brushing her hands on her jeans, still silent. Michael stepped closer. "I don't care about where you come from. I care about where we're going." And finally, she closed the space between them, resting her forehead against his, her breath shaky, eyes shining. "No more running?" she whispered. He nodded. "Only forward." In the quiet greenhouse, surrounded by roots and growing things, a promise was planted, messy, imperfect, and real, just like them. The greenhouse became their beginning, not the flash of it, no champagne toasts or grand declarations, just long days with their sleeves rolled up and dirt under their nails, a slow rebuilding, a kind of love that didn't demand attention, only intention. Evelyn didn't take the buyout. She sent the paperwork back unsigned, along with a short note. "My future's already in bloom." Heart and Stem reopened a week later with fresh shelves, a new sign, and one big change, a handmade chalkboard near the door that read, "Flowers grown by little hands." It was the start of something Evelyn had dreamed of for years but never had the courage to build, the Flower Roots program. Local schools, low on funding and often forgotten, would now have small gardens of their own. Evelyn taught the kids how to plant and trim and speak the language of soil. Michael handled the logistics, building raised beds from salvaged wood, creating irrigation systems out of second-hand parts, and showing curious kids how to fix a leaky hose or patch a greenhouse pane. They were a team, the kind that didn't need labels to prove it. She made things bloom. He made things work. Lily, of course, made everything brighter. Some afternoons, Evelyn would catch Michael kneeling beside a group of first graders, patiently explaining the difference between weeds and sprouts, his voice low, his smile soft. She'd fall in love a little more every time. Their lives didn't get simpler, just steadier. There were still bills to pay, engines to fix, and days when nothing bloomed quite right. But there were also late-night dinners in the greenhouse, lit by string lights, Lily's drawings tacked proudly in the shop, and quiet moments when Evelyn would catch Michael looking at her like she was still the most unexpected part of his life. They didn't talk about fate much, but sometimes, when the rain tapped gently on the greenhouse glass and the scent of lavender filled the air, it was clear. Love, like roots, found its way, and they were exactly where they were meant to be. The backyard of heart and stem had never seen so many folding chairs, or mason jars filled with lemonade, or that many wildflowers crammed into every vase, watering can, and wheelbarrow in sight. It wasn't the kind of wedding you'd find in a bridal magazine, but it was perfect. It was theirs. Michael stood at the end of the aisle, nervous but grounded, wearing a simple button-down shirt and the same boots he fixed cars in. His hair was combed, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a single marigold was pinned above his heart. Lily had insisted on that. She also insisted on being both flower girl and co-ring bearer, because in her words, "I've been here since the beginning." Evelyn walked down that aisle with her bare feet brushing the grass and sunlight tangled in her hair. Her dress was simple cotton, soft and fluttering in the breeze, and her bouquet looked like it had been gathered straight from the field, because it had. She'd picked it that morning before the shop opened, hand steady, heart full. The town had come out in full force, neighbors, customers, teachers, even Rick from the garage. No one wore tuxedos. The food came from potluck tables. Someone's cousin played acoustic guitar under a string of fairy lights strung from the greenhouse roof. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't curated. It was real. When the vows came, Michael kept his simple. "You are the thing I didn't know I was allowed to hope for, but I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know you were worth the wait." Evelyn's voice trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. "You loved me before you knew what the world called me, and you kept loving me after. That's all I've ever needed." There were tears, laughter. Lily practically danced during the first kiss, clapping louder than anyone. And as twilight settled and the stars blinked into place, Evelyn looked around at the people who'd gathered, their people, and knew the truth. Happily ever after didn't need a castle. Sometimes it bloomed right behind a flower shop, and it was enough. It was everything.